back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Robert Irving, CEO of Buffalo Growth Partners, a private equity firm investing in industrial services companies in the US. Robert is going to give us his insights into his journey, founding a business, selling to private equity, going along the journey with private equity through 2 rounds of exits, and then setting up his own private equity independent sponsor. Let's dive in. Robert, if you can share with us a brief insight into you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I really appreciate being here. I'm excited for this one. Background's a little bit untraditional for private equity. Started a fire and life safety company, grassroots from the ground, founded it with a buddy of mine here out of Texas, grew it up to 75, 80 technicians, and ultimately exited to private equity. At the time, didn't really know what private equity was, didn't know what a roll-up was, wasn't familiar with all the nomenclature and all the words and buzzwords. But joined that team and stayed there for 5 years and helped execute a really large scale PE-backed roll-up, if you will. I was one of the VPs inside the roll-up machine and helped execute over 100 transactions and integrate those businesses fully from a technology standpoint. And then kind of exited last year, if you will, started my own independent sponsor firm out of Texas called Buffalo Growth Partners. And just enjoyed the ride and excited for the future.
Marvelous. Lots to unpack in this conversation. So what's one mistake that you see private equity or portfolio companies making, and what would you suggest to correct them?
I think for me, it's all centered around people. Like one of the things I say is that, when you look at somebody, do they have 20 years of experience or do they have 1 year of experience repeated 20 times? And I've just seen it over and over and over again that in my world, right? Service-based, what I say our thesis is guys in trucks fixing broken stuff. And it's all driven by the people. And so I think leadership development, talent development, and then I would say one of the things is like understanding what they want. I call it 2 converging paths. One is the path of the employee or the owner. What do they want to do? What is their career drawing them to do? And then what is the path of the business and what does the business need? And where those 2 converge is really where the special sauce is made. And then our job as PE or independent sponsors is to color in around them to make sure that we can build out the entire team to double down on their strengths. And that's where everyone is the happiest in terms of alignment. And I've just seen that, and we call it square peg round hole, where it's just forcing people into a situation rather than a push versus a pull.
So talk to us about your journey then. You obviously sold your business, Better Fire Protection, to Summit. Then at the time, I believe, was backed by CI Capital Partners and now backed by BlackRock. So just talk to us about that experience of the sale process and, considering that sale, courting, obviously, private equity and other options as well. Just give us a walk through that as a kind of founder-owner perspective.
Yeah, I think, we were off market. We weren't for sale. We were just building the business. When I sold, I was 29 years old. My partner was 29 years old. It really just had been approached and kind of explained the process of private equity, where they were in the fund life, what the current share price was. It had been suppressed due to COVID. We sold right at the beginning of 2021. And so it was like, there's an incredible opportunity here. They had a nice pipeline. I think we only were held for like 6 or 8 months before we transitioned to BlackRock. And then from there, we stayed for 4.5, 5 years before they sold to BDT, which was last July, I believe. And so, that process was just a mutual connection. Somebody that had sat on the board introduced us. And honestly, it took a while. I mean, it's one of those things, and it's the same thing now. We do all off-market search where we weren't convinced to sell. We weren't even thinking about it until they kind of came in. We had some, mutual friends, mutual connections, and just kind of the same shared vision for how we wanted to build and grow. And they brought resources to the table. And, ultimately from a financial perspective, it made sense. And that's why we decided to exit.
So, okay. So did origination off-market deal. There'll be lots of people interested in how they did that. How did those guys approach you? Was that by the private equity firm? Did you get approached by by Summit itself?
It was actually a PE firm. So one of the guys that sat on the board of the PE firm knew me through Texas A&M, through a university here in Texas.
Right.
We had heard of each other, kind of knew of each other, and went to dinner one night, just had a conversation. And I would say from that dinner, it probably took over 1.5 years before the transaction actually transpired. It was just a mutual friend thing. We kind of broke up for a while and lost touch, and then came back together. And I think for them, it was probably timing. If you were going to tell their side of the story, like the first time when we talked was probably, you know, April of 2020, right in the heat of COVID. Um, and so it kind of transpired after that. But yeah, we, here at Buffalo Growth, all we do is off market search. We haven't looked at a bank deal yet. And so it's one of those things where I think it's really unique to build that. I think people like to call it proprietary deal sourcing, right? But I refer to it more as just off market, creating that relationship with owners and really getting to understand what drives them. And that's the uniqueness of it.
What made you consider the offer? You mentioned obviously it took a year. At what point was it, and why would that? What kind of was the trigger that made it a no from a, or maybe for the later, but turned to a okay, this is time.
Yeah, I mean, we were a rapidly growing business. We had first year was like 3 million in revenue, and then it hit six, and then 12, and we were just growing very rapidly, all organic. We'd never done an acquisition, and so really my background and just understanding them and the learning that they were bringing to us and the pace that they were wanting to run at. That's really what was kind of intriguing to us was knowing that we could hop into a machine and really be a big part of that. We were very, very early on the platform lifecycle. I don't know exactly what deal, but it was probably, five, six, like we were really early. And doing what they wanted to do, we knew we could have a big part of that and really help lead that charge and gain a ton of experience. Obviously, from a monetary standpoint, right? The money was right and it all made sense. But yeah, ultimately that's what happened. We got to jump on board and kind of help lead that charge and be really involved and learn a ton. And so that's what kind of pushed us to do it.
Okay, so kind of two-part question. One, obviously, thinking about that exit process and making that sale, but then also, whilst you were in that seat, then obviously as a VP, going out there and supporting the acquisition of new businesses and integration. What advice would you give to either private equity firms or portfolio executive teams on how to become the chosen one when they are in a process to acquire an add-on acquisition? It might be part of a process, it might be an off-market deal, like you mentioned. How do they become the one that gets the business?
Yeah. I mean, the easy answer, right, is just always overpay. I don't think anybody wants to hear that, and that's not the approach I take, right? That's the easy answer. The hard answer, I would say, is it's creating that human to human connection. It's really trying to differentiate and understand, what is important to you in this transaction. If let's say that money's all equal, let's say that everybody has the same bid. If you're even in a competitive bid process, we try not to be. We try to do off market deal sourcing and create a real relationship because it's not a commodity. This is a true partnership. We're going to lock arms and we have to win together. And I think it's trying to get that story out of them of why are they interested in transacting? What is most important? Is it their people? Is it their customers? Is it their legacy? Is it the branding? And then really kind of creating your narrative around that story and holding true to it. So in a roll up, right, where you're in one industry segment and you're kind of going deep into it, your reputation speaks for itself. And a lot of the businesses that you buy, those owners know 5, 8, 10 more people. And as long as you hold to your reputation and do what you say you're going to do, they will introduce you to more people. And it becomes a much easier narrative whenever you're having lunch or dinner with someone to say, yeah, you've known Bob for 10 years. We bought his business. He's very happy. And you kind of that flywheel, that snowball kind of creates itself. But it all comes back to people and what's driving them to have this conversation. To your point of asking me, like our whole thing was growth. We wanted opportunity. We were young, hungry. We know fire protection deeply. What is it that we're going to get out of doing this? Because we didn't need money. We had a very profitable business, but ultimately we knew we could hop on a machine and learn. Well, that's what they sold us. Hey, y'all are at the beginning. Here's the positions. Here's the kind of trajectory upward. So I think it's crafting that narrative around what that owner is after.
Okay, interesting. So, talk to us about that journey. Then you sold the business. You're now part of the what was the CI Capital, and then moving into BlackRock in the growth of Summit. Nearly 5 years within that business. Talk to us about that journey. Talk to us about the learning. Talk to us about what you're taking from working in that what is now a bit of a monster in the industry.
Yeah. I think one of the things that has stuck with me the entire time, I wrote about it this morning on LinkedIn, was what's called an informal feedback loop. And so what I mean by that, and I think Elon's probably the best example that we have of it, is taking the top guy that makes a lot of the decisions and having them plugged into the bottom tier, if you will, the actual boots on the ground operators. And it's tough because all those levels of leadership, if you will, begin to play the game of telephone, and that message, right, of the truth gets diluted as it gets moved around. And so one thing that I saw that the CEO there, his name was Jeff, and incredible leader. one of the things I saw that he did was he constantly reached out to the boots on the ground and had those conversations to where he had unfiltered raw information from them on what's working, what's not working, what needs to be fixed, training systems, because we fully integrated. I mean, from CRM to field service management to ERP, everything, all the branding was agnostic. I mean, it was day one. We fully integrated businesses. And that's an uphill battle when you're running at, 1 to 2 acquisitions a month. It was a pretty fast pace.
Okay. So just talking about that learning journey, you mentioned that and that kind of being connected at, from technician level all the way back up to the top of the chief exec. What was one or two of the big takeaways that you took from this journey, being part of that bigger engine and obviously hunting for that information and partly the reason why you sold as well?
Yeah. I think I always ask that question, like what differentiated us? I think at one point I think there was over 20 plus PE-backed fire protection roll-ups that were, in our world. And I always ask the question, what differentiated us? What made us special? I think one of the things was our ability to retain the owners. That was one of our MOs, modalities of operation, if you will, was roll forward equity and retaining the owners and putting them in a position where they could win. And a lot of times that wasn't behind the screens of technology and understanding how to use data and dashboards and Salesforce and all these things. It was putting them in a business development role. And so I think we did a really good job of kind of conforming to making sure we fit their narrative of what they wanted to do and having them get a second or third bite at that apple. I was, a beneficiary of that, got 3 bites of the apple on the way up, which was, it's honestly, it allows you to push on people more whenever you get into hard situations. And inevitably, when you buy 3, 4, 5 businesses in the same city and you combine org charts and you put them all in the same building, you're going to have really, really hard conversations in tough times. And when you're integrating that much technology from different data sources, I would say that's probably one of the bigger lessons learned is when you're taking data out of 4 or 5 different systems and pushing it into a new one while the airplane is still traveling, scrubbing that data, right? It's kind of, they call it. Making sure that it's right and that the tax status is right, the bill to is correct, the service is right. Like it's a bunch of little things, but that's what really hinders your employees. And one of the things I saw that it's hard to communicate this, but it's so true is the people on the front lines. A lot of times, like your operations managers, your sales managers, those aren't equity holders. Those are usually employees on a salary. And I've just had so many conversations of like, why am I here getting paid the same I got paid last week? But I'm transitioning through all of this hardship when I could go work somewhere else for the same pay and just kind of be chugging along steady Eddie and not have to deal with the constant change that you guys are constantly buying businesses, folding them in, bringing me new data. And it's a very fair conversation and it's very real, right? It's like they honestly were asking that. And I think that's where real leadership, real boots on the ground come in to handle those objections and those conversations and keep that machine moving forward. Because back to the beginning, this is all about people. And if you don't have the right people on the team, you'll never, meet the objectives.
Absolutely. A quick break from the podcast to introduce Chief Outsiders. Chief Outsiders help private equity firms and their portfolio companies accelerate revenue and increase enterprise value fast. Their bench of seasoned growth executives aren't career consultants. They're strategic operators who've led sales and marketing inside real businesses. They embed directly into portfolio companies to drive growth from insight to strategy to execution. And when deeper capability is needed, their on-demand execution teams jump in to get companies to go to market without the delay or long-term cost of full-time hires. Everything they do is backed by a proven, market-tested methodology and an AI-native operating system built from more than 2,000 engagements, bringing collective experience to every initiative. Chief Outsiders have partnered with hundreds of private equity firms and even more than 500 portfolio companies to drive billions in revenue growth. If you're looking to accelerate value creation across your portfolio, visit chiefoutsiders.com. The Chief Outsiders growth starts here. So you mentioned about the retention of the owners. It's interesting because Adam Coffey, who's been on the podcast a few times, he grew Coolsys, took it to $1 billion exit or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about retention of owners and that being a key part. What was your take on what you did there that was different, that stopped the owners wanting to kill you and the other private equity guys and everyone else, and hate the fact that they sold to you?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm listening to a podcast this morning of I think it's Graham Weaver or Graham Weston of Alpine, and he's talking about not retaining the owners and plugging in Navy SEALs to run plumbing companies. And so I think there's a different flavor to me, and even what I do here at Buffalo Growth Partners. The biggest thing is understanding what they want. Who are you, and what do you want to do? We've acquired a business out of New Braunfels where it's a young owner. He's in his early 40s. He's hungry. He's ambitious. He wants to win. He wants to grow. He wants knowledge, and like that's incredible. Let's empower that. Let's push on that. We're acquiring a business, out of South Texas, a big generator company where he's in his 60s and he wants to step aside into a BD role and just oversee and make sure that we don't get ourselves in a bind from a bidding process that he knows everybody's been there for 30 plus years. Great. It's always about building that golden on ramp or off ramp for someone and putting them in position they want to win. A lot of people call it right person, right seat, right bus. And that's where you have to constantly go. And I've had it, right? I've had conversations. We bought businesses where we thought this guy was going to do this. And 6 months in, I go sit down with them and it was funny. It was breakfast. And I said, "Hey man, how's it going?" He goes, I would just love to do sales. Like I'm just getting my butt kicked. And I said, "Well, that's why I'm here." And it was a really hard conversation. He's just like taken back, right? You're taking a business owner and I'm fixing to pigeonhole you into sales. Ultimately, 6 months later, he thanked me, right? He's like, "Man, this was the right thing for me. I know it was a big ego blow, but I'm truly happier. I'm winning more here. This is what I was made to do." So that's why I named the firm Buffalo Growth Partners, is like, we're going to charge into the storm and have the hard conversations. And we're going to do that man to man, face to face. And we're not going to shy away from it. I've just seen it be kind of the best way to do it. But to be direct, like to understand the owners and the founders, I think one of the things is if you back up in PE and study the life cycle, you know, 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of retiring owners and there still is a bunch, but it was a lot easier, if you will, to plug and play old owners with new management. But now a lot of the businesses are kind of newer. They're kind of rolling forward, if you will. There's a lot of people exiting and building their own companies. And so I'm just not a huge fan of ripping out that culture and that soul of the business and putting in new management. I think it's important to treat them with respect and have them have a second bite of the apple.
Yeah. So you mentioned obviously Buffalo Growth Partners there. What inspired you to take you down the route of the kind of independent sponsor?
Yeah. I think exiting last year to BDT in July was a great exit. And I just looked at the opportunity out there, right? And said, "Hey, my thesis is guys in trucks fixing broken stuff." And under the hood of these businesses, in terms of these service-based, route-based, technician-based businesses, it's all kind of the same sausage. It's all technology. It's all scheduling and dispatching, and it's guys showing up on site and fixing things. And we had a couple of really unique niche theses. One of them is critical infrastructure backup power. So think of generators backing up power for hospitals, data centers, nursing homes, places like that. And it's ultra fragmented, has a really nice tailwind. It's governed, mandated by law. It's a maintenance nightmare. And it's really niche. And so we had some unique contacts there of businesses that wanted to exit, and we've been executing on that. We bought 3 companies so far, a couple more under LOI. And then another platform we've started was wastewater treatment testing. And so we've acquired the platform entity there, if you will. And we're just looking for the kind of the niche sectors, if you will, in the service-based industries. But once you've learned all of the stuff that you've learned, right, you've experienced it firsthand, it's like there's just a lot of opportunity out there. And I feel like we can kind of do it a different way. And it's what I call operator-led, right? I personally believe that like finance deserves a seat at the table, but they shouldn't be the seat at the table of driving the bus. The operators and building a sustainable business and the right culture and the right leadership and training your employees and longevity, where you're not, bound to some hold. Like we're a traditional PE firm, but we're not bound to like, a specific design criteria. Yeah. So just thought we could do it in a unique fashion.
Okay. And you referenced obviously about the off-market deals, and it's the dream for a lot of companies, but having been in that process, you got a bit of a unique insight. What are you doing to try and generate off-market deals, and how are you going about it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's kind of a secret sauce, but We have two guys here, young guys, interns out of A&M, that's all they do. 100% of the time is off-market search. And I would say it's a really unique narrative. This is the story that I tell myself as to why we get so much off-market search and kind of traction is, and I've had this real conversation. I sit down for lunch, I'm sure everybody has, and they're like, yeah, everybody's beating down my door. I get one of you guys a week, blah, blah, blah. Like so many PE firms, we're so sought after. And the question I always ask is, so why are you here? What made you choose me? Right? If you get one of these a week for the last 5 years, then why are we having this correspondence? And it's like, well, your story kind of resonated with us. Like, I feel like you actually know what we do. You know what a diesel engine is. I know what, a pair of pliers are. I know what a rigid 300 power machine is. And so we just wanted to have the conversation. And then we kind of dive into the depths of their business and understanding how are you offloading material off of your balance sheet and into inventory and onto the work order. How are we charging margin versus markup? What hourly rate are we doing? What's our minimum call out times? How are we tracking this stuff via software? And you start walking through some of these problems, and they begin to trust you. Like, oh, you actually know what you're doing. You can speak our lingo. And so like we just begin to cultivate that relationship that way. And we probably have, north of 20 deals in the pipeline. We've probably talked to over 50 owners since we started in September of last year. And just had a lot of really good, good traction. And what I tell people, like my story is that I say you kiss a lot of frogs in this world of doing off-market deal search, right? You're constantly having conversations and talking. But what I want to be is what I call the prettiest girl at the dance. If you're not going to sell, that's fine, right? I completely understand it. I was there. But when that moment ever hits, I want you to know that I'm the first guy you want to call. And I'm always willing to have that conversation. And that's paid dividends to me over the years of people reaching back out and saying, hey, I wasn't ready then, but I think I'm ready to have this conversation now. Let's start kicking the tires on it. Let's have a conversation. And that's to directly answer your question, the two guys that are constantly, it's every way you can think of: LinkedIn, phone calls, text message, email, drip campaigns. I mean, we're just doing the hard work, right? It's just not easy. But things like this, putting out the content for where people can get to know me and our story and the uniqueness of it. Where we're not just financiers, we're true blue collar guys that just happen to, get rolled up in private equity for 5 years.
Absolutely. So what do you read, watch, listen to that you recommend that others should check out, please?
A lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read quite a bit. I think Brad Jacobs puts out some incredible information, right? How to make a few $1 billion, how to make a few more $1 billion. I think Alpine is an incredible private equity firm that I hope to model after, right? Their whole thesis is people. And that's all they're after, right? Is building great leaders. And I think that's incredible. But yeah, I think Brad Jacobs, and then Bill Gurley released a new book recently around running down a dream. And if you haven't read that, I thought it was incredible. Really the insight there is just kind of like societal norms and how your geographic upbringing kind of constrains your mind into what's possible and why you have certain career paths and jobs. And this book just kind of tries to break the framework of that and how you can think outside of the box and really go do special things and be driven by your work and be excited and passionate. I thought it was just incredible work.
Yeah, I think it's Mark. Mark's been on the podcast with Alpine Investors, and that was definitely a very popular one and insightful from my perspective on talent and what they're trying to do and how they're trying to create the best private equity firm, and also how much of a bit of a failure the first fund was, but they managed to go again. So we learn from our mistakes. If anybody wishes to reach out, post a podcast, how best they get in touch, please?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. I'm pretty active on there. We put out a fair amount of content. So anybody can reach out then, and would love to talk, kind of operator led, if you will, independent sponsor and private equity.
Well, thank you very much for coming on to the Private Equity Podcast and giving us your unique insights, selling to private equity, operating in private equity, and now running private equity. So you've seen the full gambit and the whole kit caboodle. I'm not sure there's much else for you left to see on that front, but I thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it.
And as always, thank you very much for everybody tuning in yet again to the Private Equity Podcast. Till the next time, keep smashing it.